Hello, today we're going to be solving quadratic equations by taking the square root. Don't forget to take notes as we go. Okay, so what to know? This method, so last time we were factoring, and we can only factor when we can make that factor chart. If we can't make that factor chart, then we can't factor. It's just not possible. Okay, so this method is only used when there is no b value. So remember, our generic form of a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. So anytime that bx is missing, we can use solving by taking the square root. And the reason we use this is because it's a little bit shorter than having to factor and the next way we're going to learn to solve a quadratic equation. So I think you'll like this one because it's not that long. Okay, so here are your steps. First thing you're going to do is solve for the variable squared. So remember how we solved equations, how we got x by itself? We're going to do the same exact process, except our x is going to have a squared on it. So once we get that x squared by itself, we will then take the square root on both sides, and then we'll write both the positive and the negative as ordered pairs. Because remember, most of our quadratic equations have two answers, so we need to make sure we stay consistent with that and we still have two answers. Okay, so here's our first example. We have 6x squared equals 486. So we want to get the x squared by itself, so we'll divide by 6 on both sides. Alright, 6x squared divided by 6 is x squared, and then 486 divided by 6 is 81. Now to get rid of that square, we're going to take the square root. So we'll take the square root of both both sides of the equation. When we take the square root of x squared, that leaves us with x. And then if you type the square root of 81 into your calculator, it'll give you 9. Okay, so not only do we want the positive 9, but we also want the negative line. Why? Because if we take the 9 and we put it back in for x right here, so if we have x squared equals 81 and we put 9 in for x, 9 squared is going to give us 81. And then if we take a negative 9 and we put it in for x, negative 9 squared is also 81. So we have two different answers here that we can use, the positive 9 and the negative 9. So when we write our zeros, we're going to have 9, 0 and negative 9, 0. So be sure, even though your calculator will only give you the positive, you need to write both the positive and the negative for your answer. Alright, let's look at this one. X squared plus 9 equals 59. So we're going to get x squared by itself. The opposite of adding 9 is subtracting 9. So we're going to subtract 9 from both sides. So we'll have x squared equals 50. Once we get that x squared by itself, we'll take the square root on both sides. Alright, again, when we type square root of 50, we'll type that in our calculator. You're going to get x equals 7.07. And then we also want the negative, so x equals negative 0.07. So when we write these as ordered pairs, we'll have 7.07 and negative 7.07, 0. Alright, 10k squared minus 1 equals 89. So again, we still want to get that k squared by itself. So the opposite of subtracting 1 is adding 1, so we'll add 1 to both sides. That'll give us 10k squared equals 90. We'll divide by 10 on both sides. So 90 divided by 10 is 9. We got that k squared by itself, so we're going to take the square root of both sides. And the square root of 9 is 3 and negative 3. So when we write our zeros, we're going to have 3, 0 and negative 3, 0. Alright, 8x squared plus 6 equals 734. So we're going to subtract 6 from both sides. 734 minus 6 will give us 728. And then let's divide by 8 on both sides to get that x squared term by itself. So x squared equals 91. And then we'll take the square root on both sides. So the square root of 91 will give us 9.54 and negative 9.54. So our two zeros will be 9.54, 0 and negative 9.54, 0. Alright, last example, 8k squared minus 5 equals negative 149. So the first thing we're going to do is add 5 to both sides. So that'll leave us with 8k squared equals negative 144. Then we'll divide by 8 to get that k squared by itself. And we're left with x squared equals negative 18. Now that we have the x squared, we'll take the square root on both sides. And we'll type the square root of negative 18 into your calculator. And when you do that, it's going to give you an error message. Alright, whenever we get that error message, or it may say something a little bit different, we cannot take the square root of a negative number, which is why you're getting the error message. So anytime you have that negative or you get that error message, we're going to have imaginary zeros. So remember back when you were graphing quadratic equations, those graphs that never crossed the x-axis, so they either sat on top of the x-axis or they were below the x-axis, remember those were imaginary? So something like this quadratic equation right here would look like that. It would not cross that x-axis at all. So our zeros are imaginary. Alright, so remember, we can only solve like this when there is no b value. So if you have a b value, you cannot solve like this. Don't forget the positive and the negative root. And then we can't take the square root of a negative number, so our answers would be imaginary.